Hey, if you have your Bibles, turn to Genesis chapter 37, Genesis chapter 39. So we're working our way through Genesis, and we know we've been through the creation, the fall, the flood, Tower of Babel. Here comes Abraham. Then we get to know Isaac, then Jacob, Isaac's son Jacob, and now we're working our way through the last quarter of the book, looking at Joseph. So the four patriarchs that are really the patriarchs through all of the history of Israel, the Hebrews, and we've talked extensively about everything that's going on in the Middle East right now is directly related back to everything that happened in Genesis. The anti-Semitic views, all of the things that are happening, the surrounding Muslim countries, some are violent and evil, and some are neutral. Some are not necessarily pro-Israel, but they're neutral Israel, and some are vehemently not only opposed, but committed to wiping Israel off the face of the earth. All of that goes right back to the book of Genesis. But the patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and we're now on to Joseph. And what we had seen a couple of weeks ago was Joseph was 17 years old, born into this large family of boys, 12 sons to Jacob and his multiple wives. These people are crazy dysfunctional. I mean, if families were set up for recovery or for therapy or for counseling, the dysfunction is off the chart in these families. Sexual dysfunction, just even wickedness. And so we see that with the story of Joseph. It says that Jacob loved Joseph more than the other sons. There's red flag number one. He's got favorites. This is the second to the youngest son, and he brings a bad report back about the brothers, basically gives dad a bad report. Dad rips the brothers a new one, and they hate him from the get-go. And then he tells them, he has the audacity to tell them that he's having these dreams where he has risen up. He gives a couple of examples, and they bow down. Well, we see that come to fruition in the end of Genesis. I mean, God's given him a vision of, I will raise you up, and others will not bow down to you, but you will serve them through your leadership. But his brothers hated him even more for that. And so finally, Dad sends him out to get a report on the brothers, but he's made this incredible robe. And you've all heard the story. You may know little about the Bible. You may know a lot about the Bible, and that's okay either way. But a lot of people have heard the story of Joseph and his amazing robe, the Technicolor Dreamcoat, the multiple colored robe. So Dad has this made for him, again, setting him apart in terms of favoritism, sends him out to get a report on the brothers. They see him coming. They beat the crap out of him, throw him in a well for dead, literally wanting to leave him for dead. And then finally it's decided at the last minute, instead of killing him and leaving for him dead, why don't we make some money off of it? And they sell him to some Midianites who come by into slavery. So they sell him, and he is now taken away to Egypt into slavery. They go back, dip the robe in the blood, tell Dad that he's been killed by a wild animal, and Jacob lives almost the rest of his life until the very end of Genesis in this mourning period, just mourning the death of his son, who isn't dead. Now he has been sold into slavery, but again, the family is crazy dysfunctional, just sexual immorality all over the place. In fact, we're in chapter 39. We're not going to go over 38, but that's a story of one of the sons and his sons, and how God basically was raining down judgment on the evil of the family. One of them was actually God took him and then gave the order for the other son to marry his wife so that the lineage could continue on. That son was disobedient. He went in and had sex with her, and he wouldn't conceive. You can imagine what he did. But the Bible doesn't play around. The Bible tells you what it is. It's graphic. It's R-rated. Sometimes it's borderline, R plus rated. And chapter 38 is a good example of that. At the end of it, we find Judah, one of the sons, who this is talking about his family, actually gets tricked into having sex with his daughter-in-law. She puts a veil on. He basically pays her a goat to have sex. They have sex. She gives birth to twins. One of them, the twins' name is Perez. And if you look in Matthew 1, in the lineage of Jesus, he comes from the line of Perez. So why am I telling you all these graphic stories, these wild, dysfunctional stories? Because just like what we're going to see in chapter 39 today, God takes the crap, the dysfunction in our life, and he works it for the good of his purposes. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those, not for everybody, but for those who love him and who've been called according to his purposes. Joseph says at the end of the book of Genesis in chapter 50, when he's looking at his brothers and they've come and they finally reconciled, and he's now over Egypt. Other than Pharaoh, he's the second in line, the most powerful man in Egypt. And he looks and he says, listen, all of the stuff I went through, Satan meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, and he's brought it to fruition. So the point is, God works through the tragedy, the sufferings, the difficulties, the hardships of our life, and brings things to his glory. And Jordy and I were talking about that this morning, because he and Saran got into a very deep conversation the other night about the nature of sickness, the nature of disease. And, at the bottom line is, hey, here's Jordy, a man of God who loves the Lord, who's been working and serving the Lord, and it's now got this hideous, hideous disease. It's a bad disease. It's not just bad, it's a nasty disease. And the question is why? Well, we can look at the life of Joseph. This is a guy that's obedient to the Lord. He gets thrown in a well, left for dead. His brothers hate him. He gets sold into slavery, and then he gets brought to a guard of the palace, his house, like we're going to see today, is doing the right things, gets imprisoned, and then finally, after years and years and years, is brought out and made the second in command of Egypt. So the point, though, is just like Jordy's story, just like your story, just like my story of recovery, all of this ties together in why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? Well, we know that that's the wrong question, because first of all, there are no good people. We may think we're good, but we're not. When we get to the crux of the matter today, there's a thesis that I want us to really take home, and it's the bottom line, and Jordy and I talked about that this morning. It is the bottom line in terms of how we view hardships and difficulties and the things we're going through. So if you have your Bibles, let's jump into chapter 39. I've kind of caught you up, but here comes Joseph, and he's now been sold into slavery. He's been taken from Canaan, which is the precursor to modern day Israel, but geographically it's where Israel is now. It's been taken down to Egypt, and he goes to Potiphar's house. So picking it up in chapter 39, verse 1, this is what it says. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. So he had been sold into slavery. Potiphar, who's an officer of the guard, which meant he basically was like secret security. It would be the equivalent of our federal agents that would go through training, who get assigned to secret security. Hey, that's a big deal. That means he's good at what he does, and it means he's been given a lot of responsibility. So he's an officer of Pharaoh, and he bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master, who's Potiphar. Verse 3. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So right out of the gate, what you see is that, again, he's been sold into slavery, he goes to this guy's house, and the Lord is with him. In fact, in these first four verses, you see 5 times Moses, who wrote Genesis, mentioned the Lord was with him. God prospered him in all he did. God was with him. He keeps saying that. And so we're going to see a story of temptation here, and you can call, by the way, what are common temptations? And let's just come out of the gate with, I know everyone points to, well, there's pornography. Yeah, absolutely. There's sexual infidelity. Absolutely. In fact, that's what we're going to see today, is the issue of sexual infidelity as a temptation. So roger that. Got that one. Loud and clear. But what are more kind of insidious temptations that you don't think of that pop up on the front page? What are just some examples? Envy. That's a really common one.
False idols.
Say that again.
False idols.
False idols. Like, what's a false idol in modern day? Like, just for us in the room, what would be a normal false idol? Alabama football. Auburn football. I would say Auburn football. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, football. You know, we got more people yelling on Saturdays than we have worshiping on Sundays. So that's a great idol. False idols, money, children. How about that one? Work. Selfishness. Self-interest.
All the senses.
One of the things about everything that we've listed, the one thing they all have in common is self. At the core, we're the biggest idol. The throne is reserved for Christ, but we'll put ourselves on the throne and put him somewhere nearby so he's close. Want to keep him in the circle of trust, circle of influence, but he's not on the throne. And the difference with Joseph is that God was on the throne in everything he went through. No matter what happened, God was on the throne. There's some principles I want us to take away from today. And the first thing is, when things are going well, be on guard. Now that's biblical. Anytime you're having a mountaintop experience, hey, whether you want to call it temptation, doing the next right thing, problems, and not just problems, I'm talking about significant hiccups are coming. You know, Moses, at one minute, he's on the mountain getting literally meeting with God, getting the tablets. The next minute, he's down in the valley watching arguably the worst idol worship in history. Jesus, one minute, is coming out of the water, being baptized. The Holy Spirit literally comes down in the form of a dove. And then God booms from the heavens, "This is my son, I love him." And the next minute, he's in the wilderness being tempted by Satan. I mean, the truth of the matter is, anytime you're at a mountaintop experience in life, and it doesn't even have to be mountaintop, it can just be things are going pretty well. I remember when I was coming in recovery, the counselor I see, he said, "Hey, Mark, be really careful with months 6 through 9. And I was like, "What?" And he said, "I'm just telling you." He said, "There's something about the way addicts are wired." He said, "When you get about 6 months in and your brain is recovering," he said, "for some reason, you're the most susceptible you'll ever be from months 6 through 9. He said, "Keep an eye out. Be really, really, really careful with that." So it comes 6 months, I'm on a high, no pun intended. I mean, I'm like, man, I got 6 months of sobriety. Guess what happened in months 6 through 9? I relapsed. And I couldn't put my finger on why. And this guy told me that's coming. He said, "Be careful." But the point is that I was having an almost a euphoric, hey, this is going great. What we see here is that Joseph has been brought out of this pit, sold into slavery, bad. But all of a sudden, he's now working in this beautiful home. And he's working for the guy who arguably is, other than Pharaoh, one of the most powerful people in Egypt. It's rich. He has everything he needs. And it says that everything he did was successful. And it says that, by the way, that Potiphar noticed that everything he did was successful. You know, one of the lessons for this is not only be on guard when things are going well, but guess who can spot Christians from a mile away, for either better or for worse? People who aren't Christians. See, Potiphar was not a Christ follower. He didn't believe in the God of Israel. But you know what he did believe in? What he saw with his own eyes. He saw this young guy who had incredible integrity, and all of a sudden, everything that this guy did, he recognized that the Lord of Israel was with him. Now, if he's not a follower of the God of Israel, he's in Egypt where they're worshiping the sun and Sun Ra and everything else. How in the world do you think he knew about the God of Israel? Someone must have told him. Joseph. And so he connected the fact that Joseph had told him, "This is the God I worship," with all of the things he saw, and he said, "My gosh, this guy is on fire." And it wasn't a good luck charm, like whatever he's got in his coffee is what I'll take. He saw a real, deliberate, true, genuine faith. Well, the opposite is true as well. When we're living a double life, when we're not living for Christ, or we say we are, but we're not, people can spot that from a mile away. So it says that everything he did in that house, he prospered in, and that Potiphar saw it and recognized it. And in fact, Potiphar said to him, Potiphar said to him, he said, everything you do is successful. So Joseph found favor in his sight, verse 4, and he attended him, and he made him overseer. This is Potiphar, made him overseer of his entire house, and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time he made him overseer of his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in his house and his field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Talking about Potiphar. Wow, that's quite a sense of relief there, peace of mind. It says that everything that Joseph touched turned to gold, and that as a result, though Joseph didn't take credit, Potiphar looked, and he not only saw the God of Israel, he said, I trust you. I'm going to put you in charge of everything. Which leads us to the second rule. When you are tempted, remember whose you are. Remember who you are and whose you are. You know, one of the most important questions in life is, who are you? And one of the most challenging questions for us to answer is, who am I? I mean, it sounds rhetorical, but people spend all their lives, think about celebrities and people of power get to the end of their life and they're like, well, this sucked. I've had everything and I still don't know who I am. They asked Harrison Ford back in 2005, at the time he was the biggest movie star ever in the history of the world. His movies, and still arguably, are the greatest movies ever made in terms of money making. Tom Cruise has now eclipsed him as the most successful, but they asked Harrison Ford, they said, man, you're getting old, you've had all this success, what is it that you lack? Y'all know about this? What was his answer? Peace. He said, I'm 70 years old, I have no peace. And so here, this is a perfect example of, you get to the end of your life, you've had all this success, and you still don't know who you are or whose you are. See, Joseph knew that. And so when he came to this point in life, he was actually ready for the temptations, the problems that occurred. It says in verse 6, moving into 7, it says, now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. By the way, in the Bible, there are only three men that are ever described as either beautiful or handsome in appearance. David's son Absalom turned out to be not so great, but very handsome. And the third one is right here. It's Joseph. So I'm not trying to pull us back to an 80s teen movie, but let me just tell you what we got here. We got a 17-year-old, he's probably 6'1", 6'2", built like a ton of bricks, got all the confidence in the world, is in this house where there's a dysfunctional marriage, and here comes the woman of the house. So it says he was handsome in form and appearance. Here comes the test, here comes the temptation. But see, Joseph knows who he is and whose he is. Listen to what happens. After a time, the master's wife, Potiphar's wife, cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. Hey, that's a very, very nice way of saying, let's go to bed. Let's have sex. Let's have a hookup. Let's have a one-off. Let's have Netflix and a date. And so she says, lie with me. But he refused, and he said to her, behold, because of my master, he has no concern about anything in the house, and he's put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am. In other words, he's given me honor and responsibility. Nor has he kept back anything from me except for you, because you're his wife. Here's the key. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he wouldn't listen to her. He wouldn't have sex with her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. So he says two reasons. He gives two reasons. Number one is, I'm going to be loyal to the man who's been loyal to me. And he looks at and again, this is a 17-year-old, hormones ahoy, who's looking at this beautiful woman, and she wants to have a secret tryst. Who's going to know? I mean, think about this. First of all, we're all alone. True. She made me do it. Also true. No one else will ever know. Probably true. She's in a bad marriage. Very likely true. I'm single and I have needs too. Definitely true. I deserve this. I got to tell you, I've been through a lot. This isn't that big a deal. I deserve this. We'll hoodwink ourselves in a lot of things when we throw the I deserve this card down. Everyone fools around. Everybody does this. What's the big deal? And finally, God will understand. God will understand. He'll get over this. He could have pulled any of those cards. But he said, first, I'm not going to do this because this is a man who has given me wonderful responsibility. He's been so kind to me. I have everything I need. I'm not going to foul against him. He said, but more importantly, I'm not going to do this against God. So see, before this happened, he already knew who he was, and he was ready with his response. Then principle number 3, when you are tempted, when you're asked to, what's the next right thing to do? Act fast. Get ready to act fast. Here's what it says. It says, but one day when he went into the house to do his work and none of the men of the house was there, she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and he fled and he got out of the house. He took off. He just took off. He ran. He didn't stick around. He didn't rationalize it. He didn't try to argue his way out of it. He didn't try to make peace. He didn't try to make reason. He just got out. Paul says, flee from sin. You know, 1 Peter says that the devil is like a roaring lion prowling around the earth looking for someone to devour. It says, so flee. Flee means run. Run for your life. It doesn't mean hang around. It doesn't mean, again, make concessions. It means get out. By the way, the whole thing about 1 Peter with the roaring lion, anything odd about that? When a lion is hunting something, anything stand out as like, that doesn't sound quite right.
They're very quiet.
Every time I see the Nature Channel or see a video where a lion is slaughtering something, they're stealth. Any kind of cat is. They sneak up on things. You know what they don't do? Roar. They don't roar. You know what the meaning there is that when sin is coming your way, you may think it catches you off guard, but there's a megaphone going, here it comes, here it comes, here it comes. Listen, when this trial was put in front of Joseph, he knew it was coming. This didn't really catch him off guard. You know, one of the things we tried to tell our kids when they were young, and sometimes they listened and sometimes they didn't, was prepare for the test before you get to the test. Now, I would show up on test day and just wing it. But if you show up ready to go and you already know what your decision is, then when the things are laid out in front of you, it makes it easier to pull the trigger on the right decision. I mean, that just makes sense. It's one of the most important things I've had to learn in recovery is be prepared. What am I going to do in advance when I get tempted, or when things happen, or when things aren't going right, or even when I'm not sure what the next right thing to do is? What is my plan of action? That's what Joseph had. He had a plan of action. And so the fourth thing to think about is when you do right, this is a biggie, don't expect a reward. If you're like me, everything works on a reciprocal nature or a reciprocal law, which means I should get what I deserve. And if I'm doing well, if I'm doing God's work, or if I'm not sinning, He owes me something, and therefore I should be the recipient of blessings. By the way, that's the whole health wealth thing. We're obedient to God, so He owes us a blessing. Hey, I got to tell you, if anyone really has the case to pull that card, I would argue it's probably Jordy. I've known Jordy for almost 30 years. He's been my best friend for that entire time. This is a guy of integrity. Does he screw up? Absolutely. But is he a man of God? Absolutely. He's not just a man of faith. He loves the Lord. He loves the Lord so much that he has complete peace, no issues whatsoever with what's going on. Because guess what? In his heart of hearts, he knows God doesn't owe him a thing. God has already given him so much more than he ever owed him. So Jordy doesn't look at God and say, hey man, I'm doing all these things for you, you owe me. In fact, what you don't owe me is what's happening right now. Okay, you don't have to do everything great for me, but at least don't put me in a situation where I've got ALS. See, Joseph didn't do that. He didn't expect a reward. What we see next is, so he runs out of the house after she said, lie with him. But she caught him by the garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand. He fled and he got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, hey, see, she says, he has brought among us a Hebrew, talking about her husband. They don't have a great relationship. Hey, this jerk brought among us a Hebrew. By the way, that's an anti-Semitic slant right there, to laugh at us. He came into me to have sex with me, to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I had lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and he fled and got out of the house. Then she laid up his garment by her until her master came home, until Potiphar came home, and she told him the same story, saying, this Hebrew who you brought into the house came in to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled the house. What is she accusing him of? Rape. And she's saying to him, hey, this Jew that you brought in here, this foreigner, he tried to rape me. Now, of course, we know that's not accurate. But listen, Joseph, did we not just see he did the right thing? So now he's being accused of rape. Well, here it comes. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, this is the way your servant has treated me, his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. Well, how about that? I do the right thing, and this is the thanks I get. Anybody else go through life like that? I wasn't really surprised when I did the wrong thing, the bad thing, and I got what I thought I deserved because I lived under an umbrella of guilt and shame. That actually made sense. But when I would do the right things and I would get hammered for it, holy smokes, that's a whole nother story. So here he is maintaining his integrity as a result. But here's the good news. When you do the right things, God will honor you. Listen to what happens. He's thrown into prison, verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison, who's the warden of the prison, put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Sounds like when he got to Potiphar's house. Again, his integrity walked alongside him, and so this guy recognized it and said there's something special about him. By the way, for them to say there's something special about a Jew from another country, this isn't just them. It went against everything they stood for. It was not something they were looking to do, to put this young kid, this Hebrew kid, in charge of anything. So he had to really, really be special. And so it says that he saw that Joseph was special. Whatever Joseph did, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything else that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Wow. So even when he gets thrown into the pit, even when he gets charged with rape, even when he gets thrown into prison, the Lord is with him through all of this. And he knows that. And so this is a huge distinction. And it's really the thesis I talked about. What's the bottom line for us to take away today? It's just simply this. God doesn't owe us anything, which makes the fact that he has given us everything even that more astounding. God doesn't owe us anything, which makes the fact that he's given us everything even that more astounding. See, that's an attitude. That's a belief. It's not just an attitude I wake up with today and because it's sunny, I'm going to have that attitude. It's a belief, which means if I wake up and everything sucks, I still look around and go, you know what, Lord? I love you. I obey you, I follow you, I respect you because you've loved me first. And you've proven that to me. So no matter what happens to me, whether I prosper and I'm put in charge of everything, whether I'm charged with rape and thrown into prison, whether I teach Sunday school and I'm obedient to you, whether I have ALS and it's dire, regardless, I'm going to honor you, I'm going to love you because you love me. And listen, that sounds great in Sunday school. That is brutal to flesh out in everyday life. But that's the bottom line. So we see that, first of all, temptation's coming. watch out. Secondly, we have to remember that whose we are and who we are. And I'd kind of leave us with that today. Who are you? Because here's the bottom line. Joseph was in jail, but he was a free man. He had no guilt. He had no shame. He had no regrets. But technically he was in jail, but he was free. His brothers who were back home were free, but they're in prison. The worst prison on planet Earth is the prison of guilt and sin and shame, and living under that umbrella. That's the reason people do what they do, is because at the core of everything, yeah, you may be physically dependent, but at the core of everything, what we do is based on how we view God's love for us, or lack of in our mind, and how we view ourselves. So knowing who you are, whose you are, is hypercritical. Joseph knew who he was. He knew whose he was. He loved the Lord regardless, and God continued to honor him even though the world looked like literally he's in the pits. So the next couple of weeks we'll finish the story of Joseph, but you kind of know the ending. It's a great ending. You know what our ending is if we follow Christ? Eternity of bliss. Not only does it not promise that we're going to have everything right while we're here, it promises that we will suffer, that things are wrong, that we are broken. But God says, I'm not left you in your brokenness. I've already resolved that problem. I've already reconciled you to me. And the things you're going through right now are temporal. In the light of eternity, what you're going through now is a speck. You're going to enter into an eternal bliss that's unbelievable. You can't even imagine it. So just as we go about this week, think about our attitude to the Lord in terms of what's going on in your life, and whether we love him regardless, or whether our love for him is contingent. His love for us is not contingent. So Gabe, Skylar, and Joey, man, it was great to have you guys with us today. What a blessing to have you with us. And come to lunch. We'll enjoy that. We'll enjoy seeing Jordy and Kim as well. And Philip, do you mind closing for us this morning, bud?
Dear Heavenly Father, you are worthy of all praise and honor and glory. We thank you that you came down and gave us Jesus to give us path to you. Dear Heavenly Father, I just ask that you would help us to look at this world through your eyes and look at ourselves through your eyes. That we would understand our position with you, and we would understand the position of this dead, dying world that we're living in right now, and the desperate need for a Savior. We ask these things for your sake and your holy name.
Amen. Thanks, Philip.